Apologize to your sister right now, my father screamed, his face turning a terrifying shade of red. He stood in the center of the $25 million smart mansion, pointing a shaking finger directly between my eyes. Apologize to Madison for trying to steal her spotlight, or I will lock you in your room until you learn your place. The air in the room went still. My stepmother, Cynthia. I looked away, pretending to rearrange flowers. Madison, my 30-year-old sister, sat on the velvet sofa, smirking as she clutched the IPO contract to her chest like a trophy. She looked at me with that familiar, practiced innocence, waiting for me to break. I looked at the contract, the $25 billion deal that was built entirely on my code, my sleepless nights, and my mind. Then I looked at my father, Richard. For the first time in my life, I didn't see a giant. I saw a thief. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply straightened my spine and said, calmly, I'll go to my room now. I turned and walked away. Behind me, I heard him bellowing threats about ungrateful children and consequences. But he had no idea what consequences really looked like. Not yet. Before I tell you what happened, the second that door closed, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. I closed the door to my room. It didn't slam. It clicked shut with the quiet precision of a bank vault sealing for the night. I walked to my desk and sat down. Not in a panic, but with a strange, cold clarity. I know what you're thinking. Why did I stay? Why did a 30-year-old woman with a genius-level IQ let her father treat her like an unpaid intern for a decade? It's a fair question. The answer isn't simple. It wasn't loyalty. It was a cage built of words. Invisible chains that my father, Richard, had been forging since I was in pigtails. Psychologists call it learned helplessness. But in my house, it was just the rules of engagement. When I was 10, Madison was taking ballet lessons and modeling for local catalogs. I was sitting in the car, doing her math homework so she wouldn't fail the 4th grade. My father would look at me in the rearview mirror and say, your job is to make sure your sister shines. Danielle, that is how you earn your keep. That is how you pay us back for the roof over your head. He groomed me to believe my existence was a debt I could never quite pay off. I wasn't a daughter. I was the service staff. I was the fixer. I was the invisible engine that kept the golden child running. Fast forward 20 years. While Madison was traveling to Ibiza and building her brand as a lifestyle guru, I was in the basement of this glass fortress. I wasn't partying. I was building AURA. Aura wasn't just code. It was a predictive artificial intelligence capable of analyzing market trends faster than any human trader. It was the crown jewel of the IPO. It was the reason investors were lining up to give my father $25 billion. And I built every single line of it. Alone. In the dark. Fueled by cold coffee and the desperate hope that if I just built something big enough, my father would finally look at me and see a person. But he didn't. He saw a resource. I remember the day I finished the core algorithm. I went upstairs, eyes burning from fatigue, to tell him. He didn't even look up from his phone. He just slid a tax form across the marble island in the kitchen. Sign this, he said. I looked at it. It was our family tax return. Under my name. In the box for occupation. It didn't say lead engineer. It didn't say CTO. It said dependent. I was 29 years old. And in the eyes of the IRS and my father, I was a child, a pet, a deduction. He never paid me a salary. He never signed an employment contract. He just gave me an allowance and told me I should be grateful he let me live in his house. They broke me then. I signed the paper with shaking hands because I didn't think I had a choice. But today, staring at the black screen of my laptop, I realized something. They forgot one critical detail about treating someone like a ghost for 30 years. Ghosts can walk through walls. And ghosts know where all the bodies are buried. I opened my laptop. I didn't need to hack into the system. I didn't need to guess passwords. I built this house. I wrote the code for the smart locks, the climate control, the security gates. Richard thought he owned this mansion because he paid for the concrete and the glass. But he didn't own the brain that ran it. I placed my fingers on the keyboard. It was time to remind my father that you should never, ever mistreat the architect of your reality. I didn't type a single line of code. I didn't have to. I had already written the script 3 years ago. Buried deep inside the home automation server under a file named System Diagnostics. It was my failsafe. My panic button? On my screen. A single red icon pulsed. It was labeled Biohazard Protocol. I designed it for earthquakes, wildfires, or chemical spill situations where you need to seal the house hermetically from the outside world. But today, the toxicity wasn't outside. It was downstairs. Drinking scotch and rehearsing a lie. I didn't hesitate. I didn't tremble. I moved my cursor over the button and clicked. The reaction was instantaneous. A deep, mechanical groan vibrated through the floorboards. It sounded like the house itself was waking up in a bad mood. Outside my window, heavy steel shutters, usually hidden inside the window frames, slammed down with the finality of a guillotine blade. One by one, every window in the glass fortress was sealed in metal. The sunlight was choked out, plunging the house into a sudden, artificial twilight. I pulled up the security feed on my laptop. Down in the living room, the scene was chaotic. The massive presentation screen where Madison was practicing her IPO speech had gone black. The Wi-Fi routers, which I controlled, severed every connection to the outside world. No internet. No cell signal booster. Just digital silence. "What is going on?" Richard bellowed, his voice echoing through the speakers on my desk. "Why are the shutters down? Who cut the power?" I watched on the screen as he stormed toward the front door. He grabbed the handle and yanked. It didn't budge. The biometric scanner on the wall, usually a welcoming green, was flashing a hard, angry red. He tried the keypad. Nothing. He kicked the door. It was solid oak, reinforced with a steel core. He wasn't going anywhere. "Danielle," he screamed, looking up at the ceiling, knowing intuitively that I was the ghost in the machine. "Unlock this door. This isn't funny." I leaned into my microphone. My voice boomed through the entire house, amplified by the surround sound system, usually reserved for their parties. "Perimeter violation detected," I said. My voice was calm, almost bored. "Lockdown active. All exits sealed. Please remain calm and await authorities." "Open the door!" he roared, his face contorted on the pixelated feed. "I have investors calling in 20 minutes. The rehearsal." "There will be no rehearsal," I said. "And there will be no calls. The signal jamming is active." I watched him pull out his phone, staring at the 0 bars in the corner of his screen. He looked at Madison. She was tapping frantically on her tablet, realizing she couldn't post about her trauma on Instagram because she was offline. But I wasn't done. Locking them in was just the container. Now I had to apply the pressure. I opened the environmental control tab. The house was currently sitting at a comfortable 72 degrees. I clicked the slider and dragged it all the way to the right. Maximum heat. The system warned me that 95 degrees was unsafe for long-term comfort. I bypassed the warning. A low hum started in the vents. The industrial-grade heating system, designed to warm this massive space in minutes, roared to life. "You want to sweat the details for the IPO. Dad," I whispered to the screen. "Let's see how you handle the heat." Downstairs, Richard loosened his tie. He didn't know it yet. But he wasn't standing in a mansion anymore. He was standing in a pressure cooker. And I had just set the timer. The pounding on my door was rhythmic, violent, and desperate. It sounded less like a man, and more like a trapped animal realizing the cage was real. "Open this door," Danielle, Richard screamed. I could hear the wood splintering slightly under the force of his shoulder. "I will break this down. I will drag you out by your hair." I didn't flinch. I didn't look at the door. I looked at the temperature gauge on my monitor, 98 degrees and climbing, and then I opened the file labeled Compliance. My father thought power was shouting. He thought power was the ability to make people afraid. He was wrong. Power is leverage. And thanks to my years of being the invisible, unpaid IT department for his entire life. I had all of it. For the last 5 years, Richard had been funneling money from the company into a series of shell accounts in the Cayman Islands. He thought he was clever. He called them operating expenses. But I built the accounting software. I saw every transaction. I saw every dollar he stole from investors to pay for his cars, his watches, and Madison's influencer lifestyle. I didn't need to hack the bank. I just needed to be a good citizen. I opened the whistleblower portal for the IRS and the SEC. I didn't waste time reading the instructions. I dragged and dropped the file Richard, Sterling, Ledger, Final, PDF. 500 pages of tax fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. I clicked submit. It took 3 seconds. That was the exchange rate of his legacy. 3 seconds to turn a titan of industry into a federal target. On my second monitor, I had access to his main offshore banking dashboard. He'd made me set up the 2-factor authentication on my phone because he couldn't be bothered to remember the codes. I watched the status indicator. Green, green, yellow. Then, a hard, blinking red. Account frozen. Regulatory hold. I leaned back in my chair. It wasn't revenge. It was accounting. He had overdrawn his account with me years ago. Today was just the collection agency calling. Downstairs. The screaming had stopped, replaced by a frantic, high-pitched wail. I switched the security feed to the living room. Madison was holding her phone up, ring light on, trying to live stream to her 2 million followers. Her makeup was streaking down her face in the heat. Guys, please help, she was sobbing into the camera. My psycho sister has locked us in. I tapped the cellular signal booster icon on my control panel and hit disable. On the screen, Madison's video froze. She tapped the screen furiously. She held the phone up to the ceiling, walking in circles, begging for a signal. But there was nothing. No 5G. No LTE. No Wi-Fi. I had just erased them. They were trapped in a silent, boiling glass box with no money, no audience, and no way out. Richard was pacing the floor, loosening his tie. His shirt soaked through with sweat. He looked at his phone, then at the darkened windows. For the first time in his life, he was realizing that his money couldn't buy him a breeze, and his shouting couldn't open a lock. He was offline, and I was the only admin left. By the morning of the second day, the glass fortress smelled like expensive cologne and fear. The temperature inside was holding steady at 96 degrees. My monitors showed Richard sitting on the floor outside my bedroom door, his back against the wall, his head in his hands. He looked broken. His tailored shirt was stained with sweat. His hair, usually gelled into aggressive perfection, was wild and damp. He wasn't screaming anymore. He was weeping. A piece of paper slid under my door. I picked it up. The handwriting was shaky, stripped of its usual sharp angles. I'm sorry. You win. Please. Danielle. We can't breathe out here. We are a family. Open the door. I stared at the note. And for a second, my chest tightened. This was what I had wanted my whole life. Wasn't it? An admission. A surrender. Acknowledgement that I held the power. I zoomed in on the security feed and recognized the truth. This wasn't remorse, it was the delusion of power. When narcissists lose control, they don't grow a conscience. They perform one. Richard wasn't crying because he'd exploited me for 30 years. He was crying because his ATM had stopped working. I knew opening the door meant facing a cornered predator. Not a father. But I was exhausted. I typed, unlock. The house came alive, shutters rising. Locks, disengaging. Silence, snapping into place. I opened the door. Richard looked pathetic. Red-eyed and trembling, until the mask dropped. He snapped his fingers. 2 hidden guards rushed me, twisting my arm, cuffing my wrists. Smiling now. Richard leaned in. He'd already arranged an involuntary psychiatric hold. Once I was declared incompetent, he'd take legal control of everything I'd built. You made the cage. He sneered. I hold the keys. Sirens cut through the house. Police stormed in. Richard pointed at me, playing the victim. Then a voice stopped everything. Don't touch her. Evans, the company's general counsel, burst in with papers, shaking in his hands. The IPO was cancelled. Trading suspended. The SEC had flagged the entire company as fraudulent. Richard tried to claim ownership of my work for hire. Evans shut him down. There were no contracts, no salary, no employment records. Richard had listed me as a dependent to save on taxes. Because he never paid me, he owned nothing. I had registered the copyright that morning. AURA was mine. Without it, his company was an empty shell, and he was under investigation for tax fraud. They took Richard away in handcuffs. His empire hadn't collapsed because I locked him out, but because he'd never valued me enough to write a paycheck. 6 months later, I signed a licensing deal as a majority owner. Not a dependent. A partner. To anyone trapped in a room you didn't build, your worth is not something they grant you. It's something you already own. And sometimes, to save yourself, you have to walk away and let the bridge burn. Freedom tastes better than fear.